Originally, when I went to study at university, my great ambition was to become a forest ranger. And I still have the chainsaw. Some of the failures that one has done, in careers, also sometimes the biggest opportunities, or are often the biggest opportunities for some learning and development. You start with a PC, an office package, and a blank piece of paper.
Welcome to Biopharma Unscripted with Marcus Metcalfe, bringing you real conversations with the leaders, innovators and challengers transforming biotech and pharma today.
The first thing, traditionally, we ask you to introduce yourself, because I think you can do a better job than that than me. But can you give us a short introduction?
Well, thank you very much, and also thank you for the invite for this podcast. So a bit on my background. I think my way into this is a little bit more different than a lot of other people. So originally, when I went to study at university, my great ambition was to become a forest ranger. I think is the English terminology, but in a forest district, with everything that goes into that, planting trees, chopping them down, and also managing the financial as well as the HR aspects and natural conservation and all that. That was a big passion of mine. So I started university first year. In order to get into studying forestry in Denmark, you actually had to go out and work in a forest. So when I signed up to uni, I got a couple of rubber boots and then went to work in a forest for 1 year, and I still have the chainsaw.
Oh, really?
That was a great experience. I really enjoyed being outside, and some good hard manual labor is really good for you in many ways.
Good for the soul.
So good for the soul. Good to get your mind thinking on other things, and perhaps even a little bit of a meditative kind of like process.
But hang on, but we should say when you're with the chainsaw, you're maybe a little bit more focused with that one.
Yeah. Stay alert with that.
Yeah, just for anyone thinking of picking up a chainsaw.
So after that year in the forest, I went into studying forestry, which is basically you study biology, but you have a lot of economics on at the same time. And I quickly developed a flavor for economics and thought that was very interesting, and I did more and more of that. And then when you have to choose your postgrad, I was sort of looking into, I'm not going to get a job in forestry. Forestry in Denmark is not very big, and it was not really the time for that. And it was also a quite lonely job, to be honest. So I tried to use what I had. And funny enough, and I don't think many people really know, but there is a discipline called forestry economics, which is very similar to health economics, because we use the same model, market models, and all these kind of things.
Oh, right. I did not know that.
Yeah, but I can recommend people to read a little bit on forestry economics, Faustman formula, and stuff like that. But you basically use macro models to model sort of the financial as a P&L, basically projection of a big forest. Wow. Where you have different populations. So, anyways. So I was looking at a little bit what kind of tools do I have in the box, and how can I apply that in a way that I can actually pursue a job. And Denmark has a lot of biotech and pharma companies. So that when I found out that there was a link between that, I thought, great. So I applied to York in UK and got in and studied health economics there. I went home and finished my postgrad at Copenhagen University, focusing on environmental economics and looking at pollution and the risk of developing COPD, asthma, and all these things from pollution with diesel particles. But anyway, so that was my way into the industry, because I then jumped into consultancy, and those were the early days of 2006-7, where everything was running crazy fast. So I got into Coloplast, a Danish medical device company focusing on wound care, ostomy care, catheters, intimate care, I think is what they're sort of the common theme across their business areas. I was there for a couple of years and really got a flavor of marketing and being in a commercial organization. I then moved to Novo Nordisk and worked there as an HTA analyst, so looking very much into HTA developers, agencies across all markets, and trying to synthesize, crystallize sort of what are the common themes between them, what are they looking at, especially in diabetes, but also oncology products, and also some of the things that Novo at that time had in their pipeline. And then I was given advice, which I think was a kind of like career moment, if you can stay in your role, and there's a certain level that you can get to when you stay within one function. It's the functional head, and there's normally only one of those, and that's sort of, if you stay within your boundaries or your functional area, that's where you can go to. But the recommendation was really, if you want to understand the business, you have to move close to the business. So where is it that the business is generated? And of course, it's a long value chain in a pharmaceutical company, and nobody can really claim to be where all the value is generated. But going very closely to the operating side of the company, to the sales side, and then actually also take, I think that for me at that time, when working in R&D or market access, HEOR, and then saying I want to go customer facing, because I want to learn how that interaction is, and how that business, how's that run, how's the management of that. So I pursued that. So I shifted company, I changed company to Janssen at that time, Johnson Johnson, and worked there for quite many years, and was so lucky to be able to become a business unit manager in Denmark for a CNS franchise. And that was like, that was a fantastic time. And, for me, a fantastic time is often when you are on a very steep learning curve. You jump out a bit on deep waters, something you're not really used to, and you sort of try to find out how you're going to go about things in this new environment. And that was a great experience to learn that, and I owe a huge big thanks to a lot of key account managers that kindly and gently taught me about that discipline of yeah. So I owe a lot of thanks to some people for taking me on that journey, and I think that's something that I have carried with me ever since. And then I also had an ambition to try the entrepreneurial side, to go in more kind of startup. So after having been out and being customer facing, I joined a startup company. So I was the second person to be hired into the commercial organization at that time, or at least one of the very early ones. I think there had been a little bit before, and then taking a company that was not commercial to becoming to have a full-fledged commercial organization, and launching products across 17 markets, and really seeing a fantastic product uptake. That has been one of the most rewarding times in my career.
Which company was that, Rasmus, for people listening?
That was a Swedish company called Camurus, and I think they just are they very recently just made a press release that they have now entered into a collaboration with Eli Lilly, which is, I think, holds a great potential for that company.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry to
go
interrupt.
on.
I'm interested in that. So from what you've said, I mean, I remember this when we first connected, that you had this breadth in your profile, which for me was very appealing because, in me, the world of market access and HOR is, you're either one or the other mostly, although people know the other side. There's a more natural home, and I guess. But for you,
Yes.
in my mind, you had the health economic start, and then you had the commercial bit, and now market
Mm.
access. So it was like this sort of unicorn blend, I guess. Often I get asked to find these mythical people that have everything. They can equally build a Markov model, and then they can do market access and roll out a commercial strategy. So, so that I can see how that would have added many strings to your bow. How was it going into Camurus as a startup environment? From coming to, I mean, I also worked at J&J. I know the company, great company.
Yeah.
But wow, coming in as number two or I mean, what were your first sort of experiences of that?
I mean, you start with a PC, an office package, and a blank piece of paper.
Sounds like my
And
world now. Yeah.
yes, and I mean, it's scary and it's all kind of thing, but it's also a great opportunity and a playground for a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
But taking the experience that you have from Big Pharma and then figuring out how is that going to be applied in a smaller organization. So what
Yeah.
are the essential steps to take, and what is something that has to be sort of put on at a later stage? I think that's where a lot of people, when they go into startup, can take the wrong path or get a little bit confused about what is the right sort of sequence of events that you need to do in order to scale up the organization in a way that you don't lose the original organization, but you get it
Yeah.
on the right path to become something which is
Can you
a
can you
full-fledged.
share us? Can you share with us that in your mind what the correct sequence is? I appreciate there's some differences
Yeah,
depending on the company,
I
but
mean, I think what one has to do when you get into a startup is that you have to recognize that startup is the creation of some people with a lot of passion, have taken considerable amount of risks personally.
mm,
Um, not knowing, not having a steady income perhaps, or having lived off their savings for some time. But a lot of, you're really standing on the shoulders, I think is the terminology of some people that
yeah,
have put in a lot of effort.
yeah,
It's really hard to get it up from nothing. Um, so you have to be loyal to that, and they may not fully be aware of all the things. Compliance is a new thing, and maybe knowing that their innovation, their invention that they made, doesn't that it doesn't sell by itself. Somebody has
yeah,
to actually
yeah,
communicate the value of it, and it's not necessarily as evident as it is from the person who invented it in the beginning. And some of the things that they think is important may not be important for the end user or the customer or the payer, the regulator. So all this has to be, it's a delicate balance, but I think it's a perspective and you have to acknowledge what they have achieved and the way that they look at the product, and that's what you then build on. I mean, one of the things that I sort of think back on is, they had this product, it was great, and you have to do some pricing research. That means that you have to take you kind of like make a target product profile. You have something which
yeah,
you test,
yeah,
qualitative qualitative quantitative description of the product that you test with certain payers from different countries at different levels and so on, in order to sort of elicit a willingness to pay. And I think it was in kind of like that exercise that I realized, okay, we are looking at this very differently, because the TPP ended up being like 8 pages, because there were so many
8 pages,
benefits
right?
from that. Yeah, and allow a little bit time to explain to the founders or the scientists or whatever who spent many years on this, that, well, the benefit plays out in the value framework of the payer or the regulator or the patient or the physician with these and these aspects, and that's not going to be all of them. I mean, patients are going to be very necessarily interested in some specific chemical structure, or it's a new
Yeah.
mode of action or whatever. You have to place the different arguments with the different stakeholders, and some of the
Yeah.
arguments that maybe they hold very dear actually fitted more into a B2B out licensing framework than
Okay.
in a
Right.
commercial framework towards the healthcare system. So be respectful of it and help them guide, put the different elements into the right buckets, I think was
Yeah.
something that I think back on as a challenge, and something that, one could not just say, well, it's this and this, because you have years of experience in dealing with payers, but you actually have to, again, put yourself in the shoes of here the founders or the researchers that did it,
Yeah.
same way as you have to do when you're out being customer facing, and there's this, try to put yourself in the shoes of the customer and think about how they look upon the product. So it's a little bit using that mindset, I think, is useful to get the
Yeah.
organization along the journey of becoming a commercial organization.
Yeah. You have to wear many hats. I mean, I seem to post a lot about this recently, and every time I post a topic about, I guess it's mainly the emerging biotech model, where you have a very talented and scientifically minded CEO who has their baby. They love it. They've put all these years and time and effort, and you're kind of coming in almost like the bad news guy sometimes, because because maybe they haven't commercialized before. Often they haven't commercialized. So
Exactly.
is that, so I'm just, you're sort of coming in with the kind of reality is, the science is great, but from what you're saying, you need to look at the end goal. Where are we trying to get to here? And maybe a lot of that is new information. And then I guess that, I mean, not everyone's got that ability to communicate. So what is the Rasmus approach and style to try and bring people with you and help them understand? Because your argument is based on, it's a valid argument. You're not, these people have certain needs. That payer needs certain information. That policy in that particular company is valid. It is a thing. You can't avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I think I think back on it with some level of frustration, or at least I felt frustration at that point in time. But I think it is just something to be aware of, and you're not aware of it, you're gonna get some bruises.
Yeah.
So I think it was a learning process for me, and that's also
Yeah.
what I like. What I said, I like to being on a steep learning curve. But thinking back, what was actually the situation, and how would I do it differently next time? But we managed, and we got it all to be successful in the end, and everybody was happy and could look back on it and with a little bit of a smile. But it was really creating a common understanding, I think, is again the way to frame it, right? But there was some convergence on both ends that had to happen, and one had to again learn the perspective of the other. And what can be, when I think back on my early career at the first job I had, one was a little bit stuck with this cost per quality framework, right? Because that's what you're sort of trained to think about as a health economist, especially coming out of the UK. And that is utterly abstract from speaking to a nurse that has been co-developing a new wound care dressing or a new feature on an ostomy pouch, you know. So again, you just have to be aware or become aware of the different perspective, and then find out how can you help, support the argument or the brand, but payer related arguments.
From your breadth of experience, at least, you're pulling from your actual expertise and understanding different sectors to try and, so your argument is more compelling. You don't have this linear expertise, which I think would put you in a strong position compared to a lot of people. One of the things we touched on when we were preparing for there were a couple of things which maybe we can delve more into, because you've given me a good insight into your career and how it's evolved. But I think two of the things I have in my mind I'd like to ask you about. One is perhaps some of the people that have helped you in that journey, because I certainly look back and I've got two clear people for me that have been absolutely pivotal in shaping my career and mindset. So that was the first thing, is to maybe understand some it doesn't have to be the people, but just some of the lessons that help shape that for you.
Yeah.
And then we also touched on failure, making mistakes, and some of the. I think you had a good one. So for me, I like feedback. I like learning. I think a lot of it's about delivery, but I think it's an important lesson.
I touched briefly on it, but I had this boss in Novo Nordisk. I actually have two bosses there that I take a lot from.
Is this? Are we? From. So we're looking at the mentor one first, yeah, and then we'll look at the.
yeah, we can take that, and that was a guy. Ole was his name, and he told me this, that if you want to have a career in pharma, go close to the business. You have to at one point be close to the business and that understanding, because it gives you a breadth of understanding and more gravity in your arguments, because you now have some very solid arguments and a good understanding of what will work in front of the customer. And all the revenue is generated by some interaction between the company and the customer. So knowing that aspect on the commercial organization, for me, is absolutely crucial. And I would recommend to anyone to seek out opportunities to, if not going out there in a role, but then ask to co-drive with some key account managers, or just be allowed to go out there with some of the people employed in the company who are in their role as a observer, or just trainee, or just for educational purposes. That, I think, is really, really valid and will give a lot of strength to the person's arguments afterwards. So that's an argument that I take with me all the time.
Yeah.
There was another person called Anna, I think her name was. She was actually very tough. And initially, I thought that was quite frightening. But in addition to the toughness, there was absolute clarity. And that gave some kind of calmness also, because everything was very clear. And that gave me sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity, and people have to live with ambiguity, but sometimes the ambiguity is also because people are afraid of being clear. And she was very clear.
I think
And
that's such a good point. I mean, sorry to interrupt, but it's, the reason I stopped you is because, I mean, that's, I'm British, and that is, we're not always that clear as a, as a generalization. But you're right. I mean, I remember, when I first started dealing with Dutch companies, boom, this is
yeah,
it. There's no room for, for fluff.
yeah.
So, I mean, I struggle with that. So yeah, I'm sorry. Carry on. I'm interested to hear where this goes because
Well, it
I'm not
was
that clear myself.
you but it was something that I noticed that, okay, even though this is tough, you know, it's also very clear, and it gives a lot of um, or stress, or
Yeah.
one could call it waste, in a how a department is run. It was just actually very clear, and I enjoyed it. I hadn't thought about that, but
This
it
is.
became clear to me that that is something that, as a leader, one should not be afraid of being clear. There's also some advantages of not being clear and basically delegate and cultivate a little bit the one's employees' creativity in coming about with certain things. And
Yeah.
you need a little bit of ambiguity, or at least try develop something that can solve this. So they have freedom as to how they can do it. There's something good about that, but it's good to be clear when that is expected, and when you have to be quite clear on what is needed, and just provide the clarity and the direction within that. So not being afraid of using both kind of ways of coaching or leadership style. It really just depends on the
Hmm.
situation.
Yeah.
So
I
those
think
were,
also.
I think, some of the things that I take with me quite a lot.
I think the clarity. Yeah, the clarity
uh,
bit's really interesting. I think the. I mean, I struggle with that. I really, and I think also what's interesting is doing a podcast when you record yourself and you start to listen back to how you actually come across. It is incredible. And I know this because A, I've looked back at the podcast, but B, the podcast director, Tom, has told me that I'm better now. But at the beginning, I'm kind of, I'm just like, um, did it again. So when you look at the video played back to you, it's quite helpful to help you learn, because I think you can actually learn that. That clarity is, it's
yeah,
just almost going back to the school, really. You have to sort of have that face. That was clear when you record a video of yourself. That's clear how I was. I was like, okay, I don't like that. That's I would I think, well, okay, I'm a nice guy. That's why people like working with me. But also, you're right. In any situation, I know when I move forward in the situation, it's because I understand the information clearly. I like working with my accountant, for example, because he's clear. It's numbers, it's figures. There's not so much emotion to it. But I think the delivery is important, isn't it? In terms of that giving people clear instructions. You have to find the right tone as well, to because
yeah.
people receive information differently. So I think, would you agree that's a
That's
key component?
that is very key, and there's a lot of you know listening to a podcast which is just voice, radio podcast, compared to having also a visual element to it, makes a lot of difference.
Mm,
And when you are need to be clear, it's very good that you are also visual, have the person in front of you, or because then suddenly how you come across, your body language, your tone, everything becomes important, and you need to orchestrate that in the right way. And but this is leadership when you have time to think about it. But
yeah.
sometimes in the real world, leadership is also very on the spot. So, but you learn along the years, and if you're a little bit open minded, you have the ability to gather experience and improve the way
Yeah.
things are being done over the years.
I
So
I think I
yeah,
was going to, sorry, there's a slight there, but I think also that ability to receive feedback. I mean, I give feedback a lot in my job, and I
yeah,
have to position it in a certain way because some people get very defensive when they see it as a
it's
criticism. So you have to sort of try and
of course,
understand the person. Not the same approach doesn't work for everybody. So sometimes I find I'm asking permission to, to give feedback, to sort of almost prepare somebody and then give it. I have to give the story as to why I'm giving it as well, to, what it means, rather than just, you didn't do that. It's, if I think if that clarity had been there at the beginning to say, your job is X, Y, and Z. So it's very clear if you haven't done that, that's not ambiguous. But I think that's also important as well, isn't it? As to, the,
I mean, it is, and again, here comes also cultural differences. And you mentioned the Dutch company, right? And you
yeah,
always have the polite British. So it is a way to find something which is, again, being authentic is important. But
yeah,
I've learned, now we're going into the failures,
yeah. Let's
and I
do it.
can I
Yeah,
can mention I
reveal
can
all,
mention a
Rasmus. Tell
few.
me your biggest mess ups.
I oh I'll try and condense it.
Is there many? Is
But
there
I
many?
think, I mean, one thing that I learned, I mentioned I worked at Coloplast and I worked at Novo, and both of them are international companies with thousands of employees. One, of course, considerably bigger than the other, especially today. But I had sort of come to the conclusion at that time that, okay, I've been working in international companies. I'm internationally culturally aware, but then going to Janssen, Johnson and Johnson, working at the regional level, was, and maybe Kuhn Torfs could be listening to this, and he would probably smile a bit when I say this because he was my boss at that time. But then I realized that I had been working for a Danish international company
Right.
because the culture in those organizations that I had was actually, and no surprise, but they were, Danish based.
What is, just for clarity, what is a Danish based? What is, obviously be careful here.
I,
You can say this because you're Danish.
so of course, I think you have the Nordic leadership style, which also differs between the
Oh,
different
right. Okay.
countries. But
Okay.
I would also say that in a Danish company, there's a high level of trust. People do not, so people do not think something bad or offensive necessarily about what you're saying. Things are understood in good faith. To a larger extent, is my experience. And then, of course, if it's a Danish company and you're Danish, everybody has sort of adapted to a Danish way, so there's acceptance of that. So you get a little bit like, I think, speed blind. I think could be
Mm.
perhaps a way to call it. I mean, you don't notice that you're Danish because everybody has accepted that that's the way that things are being done and said and so on. Then moving to a company where the Danish part of the organization is so small,
Yeah.
and you're now working in a European role, that suddenly exposed me to that speed blindness, cultural blindness that
Mm.
that one had developed. So, so I remember a few conversations and emails, that people took not in the way that I had intended it, but took it. I wouldn't say offensive, but was surprised about them. And today I will apologize right away. But there were things that I thought was like, but this is common that you just, you can write that and everybody thinks that's in good faith, and you'll just, clap each other's shoulders when you see each other next time or something. But that's not necessarily how it's understood in other cultures.
Okay.
So I thought I had done a great job, and Kuhn, if you're listening, I think you remember this conversation. He's very surprised that was perceived that way. But again, some of the failures that one has done, in careers, also sometimes the biggest opportunities, or are often the biggest opportunities for some learning and development. So I'm thankful of that, and I take great care in making sure that the communication that I have with people is culturally adapt. Again, sometimes when there's a lot of stress or pressure on, one unfortunately does not always have that surplus to mental surplus to take that into account, and that's where misunderstandings can happen. But it is something, it's an element that one has to bring along and constantly be aware about. So and again, I think everybody now is probably getting used to ChatGPT or Copilot and things like that. And I will only recommend using that to draft emails that may be a little bit, there's a little bit tension on, or there's an opportunity here for some people to misunderstand. Maybe you have to be extra clear about some things. Then just have a little bit back and forth, and with some AI help to make sure that the right tone and also right, so a person, you can personify the the AI machine. So how the person from this area coming, in this position and so on, understand this? I'm a little bit concerned about this. How should I phrase it? Because again,
it's crazy, isn't it? You can do that.
It is so great.
Yeah.
I think it's a tool that I use a lot. Help, specific.
I think with just thinking about my world, I mean, that's, that cultural piece is so often you don't get the match. You get the CV on paper that fits the job and it looks great, and then, if not enough time's been invested in that, sort of person component, it can be a disaster. And I think particularly now we're not meeting really, in face to face, and that's something I love it when I go to conferences. I mean, they are the highlights of my year. I can, my excitement level is so high because you get a true complete sense of people and the situation, and you can learn actually on the spot about cultural differences and sensitivity, and people are open to you asking that. But so many times, I've heard disastrous situations. Hopefully I'm not part of those where I've placed people, but where that match hasn't been there. So no, thank you. I mean,
in your role, I think it's really important to onboard a potential candidate to the culture of that organization. I mean, if I was going to with a US organization, I would be sitting down thinking a little bit, how would I come across? I mean, I'm from the Nordics. We are pretty sort of flat hierarchical approach to it. We don't necessarily speak highly about ourselves. We have this law of the enter and stuff like that. So I'll try and become a little bit more comfortable with what I would be uncomfortable with.
So are you referring to, just you bragging, as we'd say, saying, I'm amazing at this, I'm great at that. You're saying that would fit that style more, yeah?
Yeah. That,
you are great, Rasmus. You are great, though. You know that.
but the law says you're not greater than anybody else, and a
Well,
lot of things. But yeah, Sandem also wrote that,
yeah,
um, but it is just something to be mindful of.
yeah, yeah,
It's to be mindful of in Denmark. Otherwise, I will come
yeah,
across being bragging, but I will come a little bit too soft across if I have to speak to
yeah.
certain other cultures.
But
People from
but I
other
would say
cultures.
also finding that balance. You still have to be yourself here. There's no point, being a different character in the interview. That would be false
So,
too. So you have to have a nod to the, it's that emotional intelligence to know that there's a certain thing I need to bring here, which is genuinely me,
that's,
but also that will
yeah,
resonate more than, another stuff.
yeah. I think that's a very, very important point. I mean, I've been given
Thank
feedback
you.
once that
Okay.
you know, but, given feedback about something which was just a part of who I who I was, and I couldn't really take it away because then, I mean, you can tone some things down, but you cannot fundamentally change yourself
Yeah.
without losing that authenticity. Again, you can
Yeah.
play some things down, speak slower, and so on, but one is either live, if one is a lively person when speaking or get enthusiastic about, talking to people and so on, then
Yeah.
that's a hard thing to necessarily tone down, or if one has to be even more
Mm.
active when speaking to people, that it, when you're not authentic, it comes across very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. That's true. Okay. Well, thank you for your insights there. It's just coming to the I guess the final part of our discussion. So bringing all that together, where are you now in your, in terms of the next steps for you? Because, we've looked back earlier at the breadth you bring, and we've kind of just, I like the way we've gone into this with the cultural aspects, because I know it was something we wanted to discuss, but the fact that it naturally comes as part of the discussion is great. That's why I love doing these.
Yeah.
But in terms of next steps for you, you've got all these components. You've got health economists, commercial, market access, BD as well, which we didn't really touch on, but I know you've
Oh yeah,
done that.
right.
You forgot
Yeah,
that bit.
yeah.
But what are the next steps? Maybe just to conclude today for
I think,
you,
I mean,
and where we go from here.
yeah. So in terms of next steps, I think what I'll be looking for is, again, coming into a position where one can really use the breadth of of the different functional areas
Because
that I've
you're
been in.
looking
And
you're looking for something now, yeah.
yeah. I've been in different biotechs, some successful, some not. Some I tried to find myself or to build up myself. It has been a great experience, and you suddenly you get exposed to fundraising, getting investors on board, investor pitch, all these things, which is very very also
That's
important,
really
especially
useful. I think the fact that I know you've had that expertise, yeah, it's great.
preparing for IPOs and of that sort. That's I think is very very important. Again, in the pharma world, there's a whole chunk of the business out there that is struggling. Where the thing about being able to raise funds from investors is what keeps them going. So no, in terms of next step, I think going into a broad role would be very interesting. That's what I'm basically looking for. It could be at different levels. It could be global. It could be more in terms of having a broader responsibility in a local affiliate. Um, I think what again the strength from being in different functions throughout the career, and being curious about what's going on in marketing. Is there an opportunity to learn something about that? Is there something in business development? And also trying different levels in an organization: global, regional, local, big and small companies. I think you then suddenly get different tools in the box, and there's if what you have is a hammer, everything turns out looking like a nail, and you use that. And I think in many of the roles where you either need to lead a brand or you need to lead an organization with sales activities and things like that, you really need to have many tools in your box to solve the problems, because they have multiple facets. If a brand is not performing well, you can go through your sales excellence, you can go through the positioning, you can go around, is there anything you haven't thought about, is there anything that's not matching up. But in my experience, you have to really take a big a broad perspective on it. Is the healthcare system ready to take on board your product? So I think many people here will think about, well, is the GOG code set up? Is the HECPEC codes in US set up? Are there some more or less perverse incentives going on in how the physicians are remunerated that needs to be changed? Is the organizations actually allowed to prescribe it? I've been dealing with narcotics. Do they have a license to hold narcotics on the premises? All these things you need to go through to find out, where is the block, and you need to find out what is blocking the uptake of the product, and think about it from as many aspects as you can, and then come up with the right measures to deal with it. But the broad perspective, I think, is really, really important to make sure that brand of the organizations get success. I mean, the last job that I had, a lot of the challenges was actually in the supply chain, and suddenly one had to become with that, getting import and export licenses, making sure that there's the right stock level. All these things suddenly become important. Managing working capital and things. So using a role that one can use the breadth of the experience, I think, would be really, really interesting. Whether that is, as I mentioned, a brand, a local affiliate, or a US company that want to start up a commercial organization in Europe, and sort of taking them from, again, the PC with the office package and a blank piece of paper to suddenly having affiliates and a distribution system in place, and seeing customers with all the right guidance and rules and systems in place to make sure that you stay within the rules and regulations. I mean, pharma is a highly regulated industry. We should be aware of that in everything but that we do, and I think it is important that we always stand up with high standards in this area, and it is a competitive strength for companies to do that. It is not the block; it is actually the way to get a competitive advantage, because people will leave if you're not following the rules. You'll be fined. You'll have bad perception and everything, and it is about often setting up the right systems, doing it right from the beginning, instead of doing the right things wrongly. You can do the right things rightly.
And I think just one of the things that I know you, but in terms of your ability to bring that at the right point as well, and also to foresee the problems, not the problems, but the things that need to come. It's not just waiting to happen, because you've been there before. It sounds like, when things start to come online, and also you have that ability that logistics maybe was not your thing before, but that mindset's really important for me with people that take on the roles in the smaller company, that you just wear loads of hats and you have to turn your mind to it, and you might not know how to do that, but you've got the ability to bring in the right people, and it needs to be done. That's the point I'm making. So
yes, have an eye on it, and have a curiosity. Okay, there's a problem. How are you going to solve it?
Yeah.
And again,
Rather than panic.
pharma is a highly specialized area. There's always people you can bring in with the expertise,
Yeah.
but somebody has to bring them in. Somebody has to ask the right questions,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's yeah, that can be the trick.
Yeah. Well, that's, obviously nice, just a nice little plug here. That's where I often bring in interims and contractors. You kind of know you're in this place where hiring a full-time person, you can maybe do a bit yourself, but sometimes, okay, with that country or that particular function, we need to bring in an expert. So that's where often I find I'm working, I'm bringing in a contractor because it doesn't make sense for a permanent person, but you need the expertise. So, Rasmus.
Yes, and
Yeah.
to be fair, a lot of startups, managing the burn rate is crucial.
Yeah.
CEOs of startups knows the date where they run out of cash. So having people also on interims where it is a little bit easier to both bring them on board as well as say goodbye and welcome at another time is
Yeah.
a little bit easier. But that flexible resource, flexible option is absolutely crucial and helps to bring innovation
Yeah.
forward.
Great. And do you know anyone really, really good that does that, Rasmus?
There's a certain name that comes to mind. But people
Brilliant.
thing, and then I can direct them to to people that
Yeah,
might be
just
able to
let me
help
know
them.
if you hear anyone. Yeah.
Okay, I will.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That I think concludes our time today. I'm glad the technology worked. I'm glad we turned up wearing matching outfits, and always lots of fun to chat to you. So thanks so much, Rasmus. I think we got some
Welcome.
great stuff there, and particularly the stuff you went to on the cultural piece is really close to my heart. So, so for now, Rasmus Jensen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to Biopharma Unscripted with Marcus Metcalfe. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. Connect with us on LinkedIn to join the discussion and suggest future guests. Until next time, this is Marcus Metcalfe, bringing you the voices transforming biotech and pharma today.